Are you ready? Don't go anywhere. Mr. Hush is about to take you on a spine-chilling journey with his captivating horror stories. Story 1.
For most of my childhood, my family and I lived one house away from a predator. Let's call him Mr. Stan. Our old neighborhood was on a hill, and it went down to a little lake. Then the road turned right and split into two parts, like a circle at the end of another road with houses. Mr. Stan's house was up the hill, and ours was in the middle. He had been living in that neighborhood for a long time before we came, so I don't remember much about him, but I do recall that every time he saw us, his face would scrunch up, like he was smelling something terrible. His house had a faded blue door, and the garden had overgrown bushes. There was one house between his and ours, and I felt really lucky about that. I didn't want to think about what it might be like if we lived right next to him. When we were little, my parents were very strict about us not walking too close to Mr. Stan's house. They told us he wasn't well in the head, and if he ever asked to come inside our house, we should never, ever let him. For years, no one explained exactly why Mr. Stan was not a good person, but we didn't need all the details. We just felt he was weird, so we wanted to stay away from him. The way he looked at us when he was fixing his car or planting flowers in his garden made us uncomfortable. When my sister and I walked up the hill to school, we always crossed the street when we reached his house, making sure we weren't on the same side. I don't remember a lot about Mr. Stan, and his story started way before I was born. My mom, though, told me that he used to be friendly, but something happened and he changed. Mom didn't go into all the details, but she warned us to be careful and avoid him. Mom said that before we moved into the cul-de-sac, in the 70s or 80s, Mr. Stan was known for drinking a lot. He would get drunk and go to the house across the street from us and do bad things to the daughter while she was babysitting. The daughter tried telling her mom, but because she was a rebellious child, her mom didn't believe her. Mr. Stan worked as a corrections officer, and soon accusations surfaced that he and another officer regularly touched their co-workers' kids. Mr. Stan was able to avoid conviction by ratting out the other officer, but in the process, he lost his job. As far as I know, he never really worked again after that. He had 2 daughters of his own, and while the older one claimed she was touched and suffered from mental problems as a result, the younger one said she was never mistreated in any way, and grew up to be a very positive person. Surprisingly, the older daughter's emotional issues led to her kids going to live with their grandpa. When my family moved into our house in the cul-de-sac, our next-door neighbor, a friendly old man, told my dad to keep my sister and me away from him. He shared the neighborhood talk and Mr. Stan's past with kids, which scared my parents a lot. So my mom and dad were careful around him right from the beginning. Mr. Stan was friendly, though. He would say hello to my family and do all the neighborly things. My mom said he even suggested babysitting my little sister and me, but my parents quickly said no. Then, in about 2002, my dad was going to work when he met a kid from the neighborhood named Lana walking up the street. My dad likes to talk, so he asked Lana what she was doing. Lana said she was going to Mr. Stan's house to give him a back rub. Of course, Dad felt that something wasn't right, so he told Lana's parents. To his surprise, they weren't worried at all, and said that this kind of thing happened often. According to Mom, when Lana got older, Dad asked her if Mr. Stan ever did something wrong during those visits. Lana's answer was yes, and she shared that Mr. Stan had acted inappropriately towards her. My mom and dad were surprised at how anyone let it happen, especially with all the talk and stories about Mr. Stan in the neighborhood. His granddaughter was in the same kindergarten class as my sister, and his grandson was around my age. Mom mentioned it was really hard to see the granddaughter at school every day, and imagine what might be happening at her grandpa's house. My parents have always believed in doing what's right, especially my dad. They talked a lot about what they should do. They wanted to tell the authorities about Mr. Stan before anything bad could happen to the kids. Mom and Dad knew that if they told on Mr. Stan, it could be dangerous for them. And if the police didn't find anything, they might get into trouble. The other people in the neighborhood weren't helpful, so Mom said it felt like they were all hiding and ignoring what was happening. In the end, my parents' strong sense of right and wrong won, and they decided to take the risk of being seen as whistleblowers. And they reported Mr. Stan to the principal at my elementary school. The principal called the ministry, and they sent people to Mr. Stan's house for home visits and investigations. Eventually, they decided that Mr. Stan's grandchildren should be taken away from his home. My mom wasn't sure exactly how it happened, but somehow the information got out that my parents were the ones who reported Mr. Stan. She thinks Lana's family might have told someone, and as my mom said, that's when the real trouble started. No more waving or small talk. Instead, he would act mean to my mom when she walked down the road alone. He'd scream bad words at my dad when he went to work. A few times he drove across the middle of the road to scare us if we passed each other while driving. He told my dad that he messed up his life and called my dad a bad person. It makes me upset because my dad is one of the nicest and most thoughtful men I ever know. Mom felt really sad and wanted to move, but Dad, being very determined, said there was no rush. Mom told me it took 3 years of looking for a new house before she finally convinced Dad that it was time to leave. Even after all of this, when we moved to our lovely new home in the countryside, I started to learn more about him. Lana and the other girls, who were now grown up, spoke up to tell what Mr. Stan had done. He was taken to court a second time, and this time, he couldn't blame anyone else to save himself. I don't remember any of the trial, and no one wants to explain it to me, and I can't blame them for that. Mr. Stan used to be a corrections officer, but now he was convicted and labeled as a predator. One morning, just a week before he was going to be sentenced, Mr. Stan took a rifle and ended his own life. The people who moved into Lana's house after her family left were walking their kids to school when they heard the gunshot. Mom says the picture of that moment still bothers her now. I think she wonders how it would have been if it were her walking my sister and me to school instead of that other family. Or maybe she didn't like knowing that Mr. Stan had a weapon. I know it might sound mean, but I'm relieved he's gone. He can't hurt another child.
Story 2.
I used to live across the street from a woman named Wendy and her son, Dustin. At that time, he was 14 years old, and I was around 12. But I didn't really enjoy having Dustin come over to my house. However, as time went on, he changed and became a much better person. Dustin attended special education classes at school, where he received extra support. Additionally, he lived in a foster home because his mom, Wendy, struggled with alcoholism. Every single day, she would drink with some people I didn't even know. They would laugh and scream loudly until 11:30 at night. That's when Wendy would finally make them leave. The problem was, by then, everyone in the neighborhood was already wide awake, thanks to her. Now let me share what happened. It was about 3 or 4 weeks after Dustin began his special classes. Wendy was drinking a lot more, and every night I heard loud banging on our tough stainless steel door at the front of our house. I kept telling my parents about it, but they just shrugged it off. They told me to ignore the noise and go to bed. But it wasn't that simple for me. I have 2 bedrooms, one upstairs, my main bedroom, and another downstairs, which is like a guest room I use now and then. When the weather is warm, I prefer the downstairs one, but when it gets cold, I switch to the upstairs. But one night, when I was sleeping in the downstairs, I heard this really loud banging noise. I knew my parents would probably say it was just my imagination, so I tried to gather my courage. And slowly, I made my way to the kitchen, opened a drawer, and grabbed a meat cleaver. It helped me feel a bit safer. Then I heard tapping on the glass of my back door, so I turned to look. It was Wendy, staring at me in the dark. I raised the cleaver, trying to make her leave, but she didn't get scared at all. She walked away from the back porch, and I followed her by looking through the windows in my house. During the whole time, she had this weird smile on her face, and just kept staring right into my eyes as we followed each other around. I kind of wanted to know what she was thinking, but at the same time, I was too scared to even try to figure it out. The fear got so strong that my stomach felt all twisted up, and I just couldn't handle being alone any longer. I really needed to wake up my parents, so I ran up into my mom's room and woke her up. She got up quickly, and I shared everything that happened. Then, she rushed out of her room and opened the door to my dad's room. We all went downstairs together, and my dad opened the gun safe, grabbing a rifle. While he did that, my mom called the police to let them know what was going on. Then out of nowhere, we hear an even louder pounding at the front door, which nearly made me jump out of my skin. Dad moves over to the door slowly, holding the gun, and opens it. I stay behind him, keeping my eyes on everything, gripping my meat cleaver, unsure if I could actually use it if needed. As the door opens, it reveals Wendy with that same weird smile on her face. Even though my dad is right there with the gun aimed at her, she keeps staring at me. When the door is wide open, before we can even speak, we notice Wendy holding a massive knife, one of those really big cutting ones. She grins even wider, then sort of stumbles off the porch and heads back to her apartment. My dad glances back at my mom and me, wearing this bewildered and confused expression. The whole scene is so strange that we're left trying to make sense of what just happened. Then a few minutes later, the police come and I explain everything to them. They walk to Wendy's apartment, knock on her door, and say they're the police, but she doesn't respond. When they come back, they tell us they can't go into her apartment unless she lets them or they have a warrant. I'm still living next to this lady who tried to break in and maybe hurt us. It's hard to think about what could have happened if we forgot to lock the front door. I mean, I'm the only one downstairs, right by the front door, while my parents are upstairs. So, if she had managed to get in, what was she going to do with that knife? It's a scary thought, and it makes me feel grateful that somehow we stayed safe that night.
Story 3.
When I was in 5th grade, my family and I went to New Mexico a lot because we were born there. I really liked spending time with my 2 cousins, Tony and Paul. When we were at their little house in Pecos, we would play soccer in their backyard or watch TV. When we weren't doing that, we'd be playing with our Legos, trying to see who could build the weirdest structure. One day, we were playing a game we made up called Pine Cone Wars. Then, the neighbor and some of his family came out of their house. Their house was right next to Tony and Paul's place. I think the neighbor's sister was talking with my mom. All of a sudden, the boy from the neighbor's house walked up to us and said hi to Tony and Paul. Paul introduced my brother and me to him. Let's call the boy Owen. We shook hands, and right away, my hands started feeling tingly. I found it strange, I thought. I think Owen was 2 years older than me. We played Pinecone Wars until my grandma called my brother and me for dinner. Oh, by the way, the rest of my family was there too. After eating, I went to the couch and played Legend of Zelda on my Game Boy Color. Because my grandma's neighborhood was pretty safe, she didn't have an alarm system. That might explain what happened next. My brother and I had to go to bed, so I slept in the guest room. I left my Game Boy on the couch. Suddenly, I heard the door opening quietly. It felt like my heart stopped for a moment. I lay there, frozen for a minute, until I finally pulled the blanket over my head. I heard heavy breathing at the side of my bed, and I put my hands around my nose and mouth to cover my breathing. Then I heard footsteps leave my room, and I couldn't sleep at all that night. The next day, I found a note on the floor. The note said, "Hi Lily, good luck sleeping tonight." Next to the note was a freshly cut rabbit's paw. I screamed so loud that the neighbors probably heard. My mom rushed into the room and saw the note and rabbit's paw. Her face turned pale, and it looked like she wanted to throw up. After a while, my grandma came in too. She got a pair of gloves from the garage and used them to throw out the rabbit paw. I didn't feel like eating after that, and I didn't eat the whole day. Also, I never found the Game Boy after that. I didn't feel safe there at night anymore, so I asked my family to lock the doors this time. But in the middle of the next night, I heard a knock at the window. My bed was right next to the window, so I had no choice but to look out. When I did, I saw Owen standing there, giving me this really big and kind of creepy smile. It made me feel uneasy, like something wasn't right. I didn't know what to do at that time, and then I saw him trying to open my window. He noticed it was locked and went away, but I was still too scared to go to sleep. 4 years later, I heard the news that Owen is in prison now for doing something very bad to a teenage girl. Whenever I remembered what happened that night, I thought about how close I might have been to being his victim.
Story 4.
This story takes place in the Philippines at my dear friend's house. We hadn't seen each other in a long time. It was a special day because she was celebrating her birthday, so my college friends and I went to visit her. My friends were not from here. They came from far away and had to go home right after the party. I live nearby, so I decided to stay longer. We chatted for a long time until we felt tired and decided it was time to sleep. They gave me a room on the second floor next to the balcony. But when I went in, it looked like nobody had used it for a while. So it got me thinking about why her older brother, for as long as I could remember, always chose the smallest room to sleep in. However, it wasn't a big deal for me, so I didn't bother asking. My friend handed me 2 pillows and a warm blanket, wishing me good night. As I went to bed, I decided to keep the lights on. It's become a habit of mine whenever I stay over at someone else's place. I like having a bit of light around because I'm not familiar with the surroundings, like I am at my own home. And also I didn't want to accidentally bump into things in the dark and break something. It was way past midnight, and I felt so tired, but sleep just wouldn't come. As I had this strange feeling, like someone might be watching, but I didn't want to make a big fuss about it. Trying to distract myself, I took out my iPad from the bag and started scrolling through my Facebook account. As I glanced at the upper left corner of the screen, I caught a glimpse of a white silhouette in the reflection, standing just behind me. A shiver ran down my spine, and I quickly turned my head around, expecting to see someone. But to my surprise, there was nothing. So I figured it was probably just my sleepy mind making things seem weird, signaling it was time to shut my eyes again. So I gently placed the iPad on the bedside table and drifted back to sleep. Later in the night, I woke up, feeling a chill in the air. I reached for my blanket, but it was missing. I looked around and spotted it on the floor. I got out of bed and grabbed the blanket, thinking about how strange it was for it to be on the floor. As I usually don't toss and turn in my sleep, I went to check the door, making sure it was still locked. Trying to push the weird thoughts away, I closed my eyes. Right at that moment, the light in the room started flickering, and then it went completely dark. Luckily, there was a bit of light from the street outside, so it wasn't pitch black. I wanted to get up and reach for the light switch, but all of a sudden, my whole body felt frozen. It was as if I couldn't move a muscle. Then out of nowhere, I saw a figure standing at the foot of my bed. It was a woman, dressed in a white gown with hair as dark as night. Her face was shadowed, and I couldn't make out any lips or nose. But her eyes were wide open, staring directly at me. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out of my mouth. I felt scared and couldn't do anything as the woman started floating towards me. She reached the right side of my bed, slowly getting closer to my chest. Then, she bent her head to the left until her face was right in front of mine. I could see her eyes clearly, and they were a strange gray color, not like any eyes I've seen before. I tried really hard to make myself move, but it was tough. She just kept staring at me. It took a lot of effort, but I finally managed to move my elbow, and then I could move my whole body. I tried to push her away, but she was gone. I grabbed my blanket and ran downstairs to the living room. Since everyone was still sleeping, I lay down on the couch. Then, something scary happened. I heard a creaking noise and saw one of the windows opening and closing by itself. I knew it wasn't the wind. That's not how the wind usually behaves. I got up and bravely decided to speak. I told them in a nice way that I'm not there to harm anyone. I'm just staying for the night. I lay down nervously on the couch, and after about an hour, managed to fall back asleep. The next morning, while we were eating breakfast, I shared with my friend and her family what happened the night before. They weren't shocked because they've also had weird experiences in that house. Then her brother shared with me that when he used to sleep in that room, something strange would happen. The blanket would be pulled away, even though he was still awake. And that's why he moved to a different room a long time ago. One evening, he was going downstairs, and out of nowhere, he heard a woman's voice whispering in his ear, saying, "Help me." It was really creepy. Later I found out from someone nearby that their neighbor sometimes sees an old man, wearing old-fashioned clothes, sitting on the couch in their living room. It's strange because no one living there looks like that. Even though I still go to their place often, I've made it a habit since then to talk to the spirit when I arrive. I want them to know that I come in peace.